The big music hall in the city was full of noise and people. It was the day of the annual piano audition, and everyone looked excited, nervous, or both. Bright lights shone down on the shiny black stage piano, and the room buzzed with whispers, laughter, and quick footsteps. Some people carried fancy music folders, others wore expensive clothes. Everyone was trying to look their best. Among all these bright faces, a quiet woman entered through the side door. She wore a plain gray coat, and her shoes were a little old. Her hair was tied back in a simple bun, and she carried a worn-out brown folder in her hands. She didn't talk to anyone, just walked over to the registration desk and gave her name quietly. The girl behind the table looked at her for a second, a little surprised, then gave a small smile and pointed her toward the waiting area. As she walked past the other contestants, a few heads turned. Some of the younger participants looked at each other and smirked. A boy whispered to his friend, "Is she someone's mom? Did she come to pick someone up?" They chuckled softly. Another girl glanced at the woman's clothes and raised an eyebrow. "This should be interesting," she said, half-dashed laughing. The woman heard them, but she didn't react. She simply found an empty chair in the back corner and sat down. She placed her music folder on her lap and folded her hands quietly, while others chatted, stretched their fingers, or played warm-up notes on air pianos. The woman sat still. Her eyes were calm, but if someone had looked closely, they would have seen a quiet strength in them. Contestants were being called one by one. Each time a name was announced, someone stood up, fixed their shirt or jacket, and walked confidently toward the stage. Most were young students from music schools or artists. To them, she didn't belong there. She wasn't dressed like them. She wasn't young like them. She didn't seem nervous or excited. She looked like someone who had walked in by mistake. One boy, now holding his phone, secretly took a short video of her and sent it to a group chat. "Guess who showed up to play?" he typed, followed by laughing emojis. He didn't think much of it. The woman, however, wasn't paying attention to anyone. She was thinking about the keys under her fingers, not the stage, not the crowd, just the piano. Minutes passed. People came and went. Applause was heard every now and then, but not too much. Judges gave small nods, some polite claps, but no one had truly impressed them yet. The woman's name was still not called. She waited patiently, watching the stage with soft eyes. Someone leaned over to a friend and said, "She's probably here for the experience, just wants to try it once." But they didn't know her. They didn't know how long she had waited to be there, how many years she had played quietly at home, far from lights, far from applause. She wasn't there by mistake. She wasn't confused. She knew exactly why she was there. She just didn't need to tell anyone. She would let the music speak. The waiting room was getting louder. Someone was playing a soft tune on a small keyboard in the corner, just to warm up their fingers. We're talking about their music schools, their teachers, and the pieces they were going to perform. There was a lot of confidence in the air, and a little bit of show-off, too. The plain woman sat quietly in the corner, still holding her old brown folder. Her coat was buttoned up, even though it was warm inside. A few strands of gray hair had slipped from her bun, but she didn't bother fixing them. She kept her eyes on the stage door where names were being called one by one. A group of 3 young contestants stood nearby, laughing softly. One of them looked in the woman's direction and whispered something. The others giggled. "She looks like she got lost," one of them said. "Maybe she's looking for the lost and found. Maybe she's going to play a lullaby from 1940. The other joked. The woman heard every word. She didn't turn her head. She didn't smile. She just blinked slowly and held her folder tighter. Someone else came over with a phone in their hand. He wasn't part of the contest. Maybe a friend of one of the performers. He grinned and walked away. "People are so rude these days," an older man nearby muttered under his breath, but he didn't say anything more. The woman didn't speak either. She just closed her eyes for a few seconds, maybe to calm her nerves. Some wore fancy jackets and glittery shoes. A few played fast, complex pieces, full of speed and flash. Some got claps. Some only got polite nods from the judges. The woman kept waiting. Her hands never left her lap. One young girl sat down next to her and looked at her with curiosity. "Are you playing today?" she asked kindly. The woman opened her eyes and gave a soft smile. "Yes. What piece?" She paused. "Something simple." The girl nodded. She didn't laugh. She didn't judge. She just said good luck and left when her name was called, but not everyone was that polite. Another contestant sitting 2 chairs away leaned over to his friend. "Did you see her folder? Looks like it's from a thrift shop." "Maybe she found it in her attic," the friend replied, trying not to laugh. Still, the woman didn't move. Her face stayed calm, but her fingers started moving slowly in her lap, like they were remembering something. A habit of an old pianist. Practicing silently even without keys. Nobody noticed that they were too busy trying to impress each other. The truth was, they had already made up their minds about her. They saw her old clothes, her quiet nature, her age. That was enough for them. But they didn't know the years she had played without applause. They didn't know the nights. She practiced after long work shifts. They didn't know how music had stayed with her when no one else did. They just saw someone they didn't understand. The name before hers was now on stage. It's the last contestant before her turn. Some people already thought it was over. The real competition had already happened. That whoever came now didn't matter, but they were wrong, because in just a few more minutes, the room would fall silent. And not because someone asked for it, but because of the way she would make the piano speak. Years ago, in a small, quiet town, far from any big music school, the woman lived a very different life. There was no stage, no spotlight, no judges, just a small wooden piano in the corner of a modest living room. That piano was old, a little out of tune, but it was all she had. It belonged to her grandmother. Her grandmother had been a kind, patient woman who loved music more than anything. She used to say, "The piano doesn't care how you look, it only listens to your heart." When the woman was still a little girl, she would sit beside her grandmother every evening and press the keys with her small fingers. That's where it all began. She had no formal training, no rich teacher, no big classes. What she had was love, for music, for quiet moments, for notes that could say things words never could. She didn't play for attention. She played because it brought her peace. Even when life got harder. When she was still young, her parents passed away in an accident, and she had to take care of her younger brother. There was no time for concerts or lessons. There was school to finish, meals to cook, jobs to do. But somehow, even during the hardest times, she made room for music. Sometimes just 5 minutes a day. Sometimes just one song before bed. But she never let it go. Later, when she grew older, she started working full-time in a small store in her town. She didn't complain. She never asked for more. She just lived simply and quietly. Most people in town only knew her as the kind woman who helped carry groceries or who smiled at strangers. Nobody knew she could play the piano like magic. Then one day, everything changed. Her niece, who had come to stay with her during school holidays, heard her playing one night. The woman thought no one was listening. She was playing a soft, emotional piece, something from her childhood. When she turned around, she saw her niece standing in the doorway, eyes wide. "You never told me you could play like that," her niece said. The woman just smiled and said, "It's nothing. It's just an old habit." But to the young girl, it wasn't. Nothing. She secretly recorded a few minutes of her aunt playing and later uploaded the video online. It was just a way to show her friends how talented her aunt was. But the video did go far. Within days, people started commenting. A few musicians shared it. A piano teacher from the city reached out and said, "She has something rare. Something pure." It wasn't just about the notes. It was about the feeling, the honesty, the calm strength in her hands. At first, the woman didn't take it seriously. She laughed softly when her niece showed her the comments. But something stirred. Something she had buried a long time ago. The dream, the wish, the part of her that once wanted to be heard. A few weeks later, her niece handed her a flyer. It was for the city piano audition, open to all ages, all levels. No experience needed. "You should go," she said. The woman looked at the paper for a long time. She didn't say anything. But that night, she stayed up late and opened her old folder of sheet music. She turned the pages slowly, as if meeting old friends again. Her fingers touched the notes gently, like they were sacred. She didn't expect to win. She didn't even expect to be accepted. She just wanted to play one time in front of people. Just once. And now, after all those years, after all those silent nights, she was here, sitting in a chair, waiting, holding that same old folder in her lap. Not to prove anything, just to let the music speak. The sun was setting outside the tall windows of the music hall. Soft orange light poured in and touched the wooden floor near the stage. Inside, the room still buzzed with quiet voices, nervous smiles, and people checking the list of performers. Her name was near the bottom. Most people had already played. The audience clapped politely after each one. Some performances were fast and technical. Others were emotional but shaky. The judges gave small notes after some performances, but mostly, they kept straight faces, writing quietly on their papers. Back in the waiting area, the plain woman sat with her folder still in her lap. She looked around once or twice, then lowered her eyes again. She wasn't looking for approval. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She'd come with no one cheering her on, no friends recording videos, no teacher standing by. She had come alone, and that was enough. The judges were starting to look tired. One of them leaned back in his chair and stretched his neck. Another was sipping coffee, trying to stay focused. A soft voice on the mic announced the next name. It was the last performer before the woman. A young man walked onto the stage wearing a sharp suit and shiny shoes. He sat at the piano and played a quick, modern piece. It had energy and style, but not much soul. When he finished, there were a few claps from the back rows. The judges thanked him, made a few comments, and then it was quiet again. Then finally, the plain woman's name was called. For a second, there was silence. People looked around. Few looked confused. "Who?" someone whispered. Then they saw her slowly rise from her chair. She picked up her folder, stood up straight, and began to walk toward the stage. Her steps were calm, but her heart was beating faster than it had in years. She didn't look left or right. She didn't need to, as she passed by the same people who had laughed at her earlier. Their expressions changed. Some whispered again, but this time, it wasn't with a smirk. It was curiosity. She reached the edge of the stage and climbed the few steps carefully. Her shoes made soft sounds on the wooden floor. She stood beside the piano and gave a small respectful nod to the judges. One of them gave a slight nod back, still unsure what to expect. She sat down on the piano bench slowly, opened her folder, and placed the sheet music gently on the stand. But she didn't start playing yet. She rested her hands on her lap for a few seconds, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. In that moment, something quiet happened in the room. People leaned forward slightly. Even the judge, who looked bored earlier, stopped writing. There was something in the way she sat, so peaceful, so present. As if she wasn't just about to play a piece of music, as if she was about to say something important. She placed her fingers on the keys. They were steady, not shaking. The hall was silent. No one expected much from her, but that was about to change, because in the next few minutes, everything. They thought they knew about her, her plain clothes, her quiet face, her age would mean nothing. Because music has no age, no fashion, no limits, and once she began to play, they would all understand that. But for now, the air stood still, and her fingers were just about to move. The first note was soft, so soft that some people in the room barely noticed it. But the way her fingers touched the keys, it was gentle, like she was greeting an old friend. Then came the second note, then the third, and slowly the melody began to grow. At first, there was silence because no one expected much. But after a few seconds, the silence changed. It wasn't just quiet anymore. It was focus. It's a kind of quiet that fills a room when something special is happening. The woman sat still, her shoulders relaxed, her face calm. Her fingers moved over the keys like they belonged there. There was no tension, no rush, no sign of trying to impress. Yet the music coming from the piano was powerful, like it had something deep to say. The piece she chose wasn't a fast, flashy one. It didn't have loud runs or dramatic jumps. It was slow, emotional, and full of feeling. Every note felt like it came from a place of experience, a place of quiet strength. People in the audience sat back in their chairs. Some stopped breathing for a moment. Others blinked slowly, their minds pulled into the music without realizing it. Even the young contestants who had laughed earlier weren't laughing now. Their eyes were glued to the stage. She wasn't just playing, she was telling a story. A story of a simple life, of quiet rooms, of late nights with just her and the piano. A story of someone who had no stage for so many years but still kept playing. Not for money, not for praise, but because the music lived inside her. One of the judges leaned forward, his pen hanging in the air. Another had his hand under his chin, completely focused. The one who had looked tired before now had his eyes wide open, as if something inside him had woken up. As the music flowed, the mood in the room shifted. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had ever felt ignored, forgotten, or laughed at. Everyone who had hidden their talents because they were afraid no one would listen. Her fingers told that story. No words, just music, and it reached people. A girl in the second row wiped a tear from her cheek. A young man who had earlier whispered jokes now sat with both hands clasped tightly together, staring at the woman like he was seeing her for the first time. Still, she didn't look up. She didn't watch the crowd. She didn't search for their reaction. She stayed inside the music, aiding each note fall like rain on a dry field. Near the end of the piece, the music slowed even more. The notes stretched out like a long breath, soft and gentle, like the closing of a book. Her fingers lifted from the keys as the final sound faded into the still air. No one moved for 2 full seconds. It was nothing, no coughs, no whispers, no clapping. Then suddenly someone stood up. Single person clapping, then another, and then the room exploded with applause. People stood on their feet. Even the judges clapped. Trio claps, not polite ones. The kind that come when you know you've seen something rare. The woman looked up just a little. She gave a quiet nod and stood from the bench. She picked up her folder, still worn and old, and began to walk off stage. No smile, no bow. Just calm. She didn't need their cheers. She had already won long ago. But still that moment. That sound of people clapping for her after all those years? Yes. It meant something. And they all knew now they hadn't just heard music. They had heard a heart. As she stepped off the stage, the clapping still echoed behind her. People were still standing. Some were whistling. Some were just clapping slowly, as if they were trying to understand what they had just witnessed. She walked down the small steps. Without looking back, her old shoes touched the floor quietly. She held her folder close, the same way she had held it when she walked in. But now the air around her felt different. In the waiting area, people who had barely noticed her earlier were now watching her with wide eyes. Some stood up as she walked past. Others moved aside, almost out of respect. No one laughed. No one whispered. One of the young girls who had played before her stepped forward, her hands slightly shaking. She said softly that was ... beautiful. The woman looked at her, gave a small, warm smile, and nodded. Then she kept walking. The same group of contestants who had joked earlier now stood still, looking at the floor. One of them tried to speak but stopped. His face was red and he couldn't meet her eyes. The woman didn't say anything. She didn't need to sometimes. Silence says everything. The woman sat down in her chair again, right where she had been waiting for so long. The applause had started to fade now, but the energy in the room hadn't. Something had changed, and everyone could feel it. The judges were talking quietly among themselves. One of them picked up the mic and said, "We will take a short break." Before announcing the results, even their voices sounded different now, softer, more careful, like they had just been reminded why they loved music in the first place. Backstage, one of the event organizers came up to the woman. "Ma'am," he said kindly, "that was one of the most powerful performances we've seen here." The woman looked up and said quietly, "Thank you. May I ask where you studied?" She gave a small smile. "I didn't." He blinked. "You never had formal training?" "No, just practice. every day, for many years. He didn't know what to say. After a moment, he simply nodded and walked away, still stunned. While the break went on, people in the hall began to talk. But it wasn't the usual gossip or showing off. It was different. They were talking about her. Did you see her hands? That was real music. I've never felt a song like that before. Even the judges, who were usually hard to impress, were still thinking about it. One of them said, "She played like she's lived the music, like it was her story." Woman sat quietly, listening to nothing and everything at once. She wasn't used to this much attention. She had spent most of her life unnoticed, working quietly, living simply. But here today, people were finally seeing what she had carried inside her for years. She didn't need to be famous. She didn't need to go viral. Just wanted to be heard once, and now she had been. The break ended, and everyone returned to their seats. The results would be announced soon. But in that moment, it didn't really matter to her anymore. She had played her piece. She had spoken without words, and people had listened. As she looked around, she saw faces, some smiling, some still in shock. She saw kindness where there had once been judgment, respect where there had been laughter. All because of a piano. All because she had dared to sit down and play. The lights dimmed a little, and everyone turned toward the stage. A judge walked up to the microphone, holding a small card in his hand. The room went quiet again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one felt heavy, full of emotion and curiosity. "We want to thank all the performers today," the judge began, his voice calm and thoughtful. "Each of you brought your own style and effort to the stage. But one performance today reminded us why music exists in the first place." He paused, looked toward the audience, and then slowly read the winner's name. It was her, the plain woman in the gray coat. At first she didn't react. Maybe she thought she had heard it wrong. Maybe she didn't expect it at all. But when people started turning to look at her, clapping again, smiling, she understood. She stood up slowly, holding her folder like she always had. As she walked toward the stage once more, people stood again. Some reached out just to pat her arm as she passed by. A few had tears in their eyes. When she reached the stage, the judge gave her a small trophy. It wasn't made of gold or diamonds, just a simple design with the words "First Place" carved into the base. But to her, it felt like more than a trophy. It felt like a voice after years of silence. "Would you like to say something?" the judge asked softly. She looked out at the audience. All these faces, once strangers, now looked at her with something real. Not pity, not surprise, but respect. She stepped closer to the mic. Her voice was quiet but steady. "I didn't come here to win," she said. "I came here to play." She paused, looking at the piano for a second. "I've played music all my life, not on big stages. It's just at home, after work, late at night. I never thought I'd be here. I just wanted to share a piece of myself, something honest, something real. Thank you for listening." That was all she said. It was enough. The hall filled with applause again, louder than before. When she walked off the stage, a few of the young performers came up to her, not to mock, not to joke, but to ask questions, to thank her, even to hug her. One boy said, "You've changed the way I see music." Another said, "You've changed the way I see people." Outside the music hall, the evening had turned dark. The city lights blinked on. She stepped out, breathing in the cold air. Noise from inside faded as the doors closed behind her. She didn't have a ride waiting. No cameras, no reporters. Just her folder, and her steps. But something was different now. She walked a little taller, not because she had one, but because she had been seen, heard, understood. The world hadn't changed, but her place in it had. As she reached the sidewalk, her phone buzzed. A message from her niece popped up. "I saw the live stream. You were amazing. I'm so proud of you." She smiled softly. She hadn't done it for the internet, but knowing her family saw her, that mattered too. And then, just before she crossed the street, someone ran up behind her. A young girl holding a music notebook. "Excuse me?" the girl said, out of breath. "Can you teach me?" The woman looked at her, surprised. The girl added quickly, "Not just the piano, I mean. How to play like you, with heart." The woman looked at the sky, then at the girl, and gave a gentle nod. "Come by tomorrow," she said quietly. "We'll begin." And with that, the woman who was once invisible walked away not as a winner of a contest, but as a teacher, an inspiration, and a reminder that even quiet voices can echo the loudest if someone takes the time to listen.